this problem, we're given a quadratic function and we're first asked to identify the coefficients of a, b, and c. So I've copied our equation down. The definition of a, b, and c are the coefficients on the x squared, the x term, and the constant at the end. So for example, a is defined to be the coefficient in front of the x squared. So here's my x squared. So the coefficient would be this right here, the number in front being multiplied. So the a value is negative 2/3. So just type in a equals negative 2/3. The b value by definition is the coefficient on the x, and since there's no x term here, you'd have to think of your equation as negative 2/3 x squared, and since there's no x, the coefficient is assumed to be 0, because 0 times x would be 0, and since it's 0, the person that wrote this didn't bother to write 0x. So b is 0, and then c is just as easy. C is always the constant at the end without the variable, so that would be 8 in our case. The next question says to graph the function on our calculator and then determine whether it opens up or down and state why. So I'm going to go to my calculator here and type in the equation, and the first thing you want to do is turn your calculator on. Go to your y equals key. If you have any equations already in there, hit clear. I'm going to down and clear that one out too. So in y1, I'm going to type in the negative 2/3. I'm going to do it in parentheses. So I have the coefficient is negative 2/3 times x squared, and then plus 8. And I'm going to hope this shows up in a standard window by pressing zoom and then selecting option 6, which is zoom standard. Gives me a graph between negative 10 and 10 on the x and the y axis. So there's my graph. It does open down, and the reason this always happens as long as you have a negative a value. So if you remember, our a was negative 2/3. It doesn't really matter that it was 2/3, it's just the fact that it was negative. So whenever a is negative, and a way to say that a is negative is to say that its value is less than 0, you will get an upside down u. So just in case you had a question where a is positive, you would be saying that a is bigger than 0, and the parabola, when you graph it, would open up as so. So we call this opening up, and we call the other opening down. So we're definitely going to say, for our problem, since our a was negative, that it opens down, and y was because a was less than 0. It says, write the vertical intercept as in ordered pairs, question 4. The vertical intercept in this one, it's always 0c in general. The vertical intercept is always 0c. If you plug 0 into the equation, let me clear all this stuff out, it's kind of muddying the water. But the vertical intercept for any equation is what you get out when you plug in 0. And if you plug 0 into x, on any quadratic equation, regardless of the values of a, b, and c, you would get out c. 0 squared is 0, 0 times a is 0, b times 0 is 0, and then you're left with the c. The c is the only thing that survives, so we plugged in 0, and all of this simplified out to be c. So our vertical intercept is 0, 8, because c here is 8. It's even lined up nicely here. So our vertical intercept is 0, 8. You could have gotten that off the graphing calculator by just hitting trace. The default on the calculator is to start at the vertical intercept, 0, 8. So I'm going to write that as an ordered pair, left parenthesis 0, 8, right parenthesis. And then I believe there's at least one more question. It says plot the vertical intercept on the graph using the point tool. So I'm going to have to go down here and use the point tool right here, and I need to plot it using plot the vertical intercept, the 0, 8, using the point tool. So that's that guy right there. Part 6. It looks like I'm done at part 6. Draw the function neatly in the graph using the poly tool. That's this guy. I'm going to click on the poly tool, short for polynomial, by plotting the highest or lowest point and one other point. So depending on where you're at in the class and who your instructor is, you're either using the graphing calculator's max or min feature to get the higher or lowest point, or you're using the negative b over 2a formula. So I'm going to use the negative b over 2a in this one. So the formula for the highest or lowest point, of the graph on a parabola is called the vertex, and the x value of the vertex can always be found by doing negative b over 2a. And then when you find that, you can simply plug that into the original function here once you get that x value, and that would give you the y value. So in our case, a was negative 2/3 and our b was 0. So negative b over 2a is going to be really easy because when you plug in 0 for b, you get the opposite of 0. And then 2 times a would look like this, but none of that matters because the opposite of 0 is 0, and 0 divided by anything is 0. So it turns out that our vertex, this is a special case, and this always happens when b is 0, when your x term is missing, that your x value of the vertex is 0, which means our vertex is actually the point 0, 8, which is the same as the vertical intercept. So the point that I plotted, and this is why I did this video separate, it's sort of a special case, that point that we plotted, the vertical intercept, is also the vertex. So it says plot the highest or lowest point and one other point. So you just need to find one other point besides this one to use the poly tool to graph this. You can find any other point by doing something like plugging in 1 or 2. In fact, probably plugging in 3 would be easiest. Now, this would be very easy to do in the graphing calculator, but it's also easy to do it with some simple arithmetic. So I just noticed that if you were to plug in 3, because your denominator is 3 here, this would come out really nice. So if I plugged in 3 for an input, so my point's going to be 3 comma something, it would read negative 2/3, and then x squared would be 3 squared. I'm replacing x with 3. And because there's a 3 in the denominator and I chose a 3 here, you know, it would work the same as if this was a 5 and you put a 5. As long as these numbers are the same, it just makes the arithmetic kind of easy. So you have negative 2/3 here, and you're going to be multiplying. Well, actually, one of these 3's, you can do this instead. There's 2 3's being multiplied here, and one of these 3's cancels with one of these 3's. So instead of having 3 squared here, you'd only have 1 left. So this is negative 2 times 3 is negative 6. Add 8, and I'm getting 2. So if you plug in 3, you get out 2. On the graphing calculator, that would have been just as easy as hitting the trace key so that you get some x and y coordinates here, and hitting 3 and then enter, and it would give you another point, 3 comma 2, or any other point for that matter. I could type in 5, enter, and it wouldn't come out real nice. It'd be 8.666. I just hoping to get one that lay nicely on the coordinate axes here, or along one of these lines, coordinate lines. So I'm going to go back to the question, and now I'm going to use the poly tool, and I'm going to start by plotting the highest point, which was right here. Remember, it is the highest point because it opens down, and I found that 3 comma 2 was another point. So I'm going to go up to 3 comma 2 and let go, and there's the a neat graph of the parabola.